On today's episode, I have James Goodnow joining me. He's the managing partner and president of Fennemore Craig, the oldest law firm here in the state of Arizona, and he's sharing some great advice for local leaders as well as how they can go about managing generational gaps. I wanted to thank James Goodnow for joining me on today's episode. James is actually going to be moderating one of our upcoming panel discussions for AZ BizLink on the generational gaps and how that influences local businesses. So James, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
It's really interesting. You actually have written a book called Motivating Millennials, which I think is really interesting and relevant to so many different businesses here in town. Would you mind maybe sharing a little bit more about what Motivating Millennials included?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually co-wrote the book with a friend of mine named Ryan Avery. He's a really dynamic guy. He is a professional public speaker and keynote speaker, and he travels the world and has done lots of interesting things. So he's written some very successful books in the past, and he told me, hey, James, I want to write a book about millennials. This is a big issue. It's important to businesses. But because he doesn't have a business background, or at least not as much of one, he said, maybe you could offer this perspective. So I stumbled into it. And it was a great opportunity to talk to a lot of business leaders, people I know, about what's happening with generational differences in the workplace. And it was a chance to do some research. And I think we learned a lot of interesting facts.
And I'm curious, how are you implementing that into your everyday practices?
In a lot of ways. So what we talk about in the book is, I guess, a fundamental point is I think there's a lot of confusion about differences between generations and the characteristics of young people generally. And so it's always just a fun pastime to bash on younger generations, that they're lazy and entitled. And that has been said for every generation as far back as we have history. That's normal. Because the truth of the matter is that younger people will make different decisions, will behave differently, will interpret the world differently than older people. But at the core, there's nothing fundamentally different about the DNA of a millennial or a boomer or someone from Gen Z. So at Fennemore, we try to remember that. And we try to focus more on what we have in common than trying to divide us among generations. And the way it's played out, what we talk about in the book is giving millennials or younger workers, Gen Z now, that's coming through, opportunities to have a seat at the table. It doesn't mean that they need to control the conversation or control the direction of a business or firm, but it does mean that younger workers are more accustomed to being heard, and we try to implement that in practice at the firm. So we do that by having committees that have younger associates or firm members on them. Fennemore has one of the youngest leadership teams of any major law firm in the country. And that's going through our ranks at our management or executive team level. And we're structured into practice groups, and our practice group leaders are on the younger end of the spectrum. And I think that really is an outgrowth from having those voices at the table and having the senior statesmen and women at the firm realizing that there are some pretty good ideas that younger workers have.
So Fennemore Craig being the oldest law firm here in the state of Arizona, how long have you guys been around?
1885.
So a while.
Long time.
And with that, I'm sure you've had to interview a handful of different generational gaps. I'm curious, the new generation that's coming in, which is the Gen Zs, those are the individuals that fall within the current age range of 4 to 24. Most of them are probably applying their first job out of college at Fennemore Craig. Are there any interesting things that they're asking for? Any interesting employee benefits or different dynamics they're looking for within the work environment?
We are starting to see some trends. So for us, Gen Z really represents the brand new lawyers that are coming into the firm. So these are people that are on the cusp between millennials and Gen Z. And it's really, I think at the outset of this conversation, we should say it's really difficult to extrapolate big generalizations, because when you have tens of millions of people or hundreds of millions of people in a generation, you're going to have lots of differences. With that said, there can be some common themes, and we do see those. I think what I've noticed is there actually has been a bit of a backlash against what you see happening with millennials. So millennials, at least the stereotypes are everyone wants to collaborate in open environments and work together, and at least the stereotype is they're addicted to technology and phones. And we don't see that as much with our Gen Z workers. We actually see a desire for more face-to-face interaction, more one-on-one communication, a less desire for the big open air environments that were really popular in the early 2000s to today. We are seeing people wanting to have a little bit of time to think about what they're doing. A little bit of introspection is not a bad thing. So you do see some differences. With that said, I think it's too early to make broader generalizations because we're really just on the cusp of this right now. And I think we'd want it to play out a little bit longer to see if we see some threads that are going throughout the different classes we have coming in at the firm, or probably in the work industry more broadly.
Managing generational gaps is one element that all local leaders have to handle and navigate. But just curious, what other advice outside of managing generational gaps would you offer to other local leaders here in the community?
Just in general?
Absolutely.
Leadership advice? I think leadership starts with listening. So I think that's a fundamental principle. I think if you move into a position of leadership, it's easy to think that you're going to bring great ideas and you'll share those with people and they'll want to follow. Well, I would challenge that and say, as a starting point, your ideas may not be as good as you think they are if they're not born from listening to what your workers actually need. And I think you need to spend a lot more time listening than just acting. So that would be probably step number one. Step number two is you always need to make sure in whatever you're doing, you're getting consensus and buy-in. Leaders that are effective know that a title doesn't matter in terms of effective leadership. And people will follow others who are willing to collaborate and listen and also push them a little bit. I mean, that's part of leadership as well, but the sort of top-down dictatorial leadership I don't think is effective. And I think new people who can get positions or get a fancy title can think that the title is what gives them the ability to push people in a direction. I think if you do that, you'll probably be pushed out the door pretty fast.
You've worked your way up pretty fast within your career with holding the title as president at Fennemore Craig. What advice could you offer to those individuals that would like to be in a similar position as you are someday?
It's a good question. I think I've been the beneficiary of having great mentorship and seeking out good mentors. And some of that is dumb luck. And I think some of that is always trying to take opportunities to go to lunches, to sit down with people and ask them for their advice. And the more I did that, the more I learned. And I also was very fortunate in that I had a group of people at the firm that was open-minded to new ideas. And so I think the more you can take time to learn and to listen and to understand the political landscape of a business or an environment, the more opportunities that will come. And it's also being willing to voice your opinion. In the culture, the legal industry, and this is not specific to Fennemore Craig, but this is across law firms and around the world, they tend to be very hierarchical. And there is a culture that existed in law firms where it was the senior partners are the ones that talk, make decisions, and if you get into meetings with them, you better not say anything. And I, of course, will try to respect tradition, but I also wasn't shy about sharing my opinion in a polite way. And I think the more you can do that, the more people will be able to see the ideas you have, and they can judge for themselves if they like them.
It sounds like you're starting to disrupt the industry.
Well, I don't know if I am. I'd like to think that Fennemore generally and the people we have is making an impact. And we are doing a lot of fun, creative things and with forward-thinking ideas. And I do think we're having an impact.
And how do you feel, or what do you believe is actually giving you the competitive advantage across your other peers or other law firms here in the local market?
I think it starts with breaking that hierarchy. So that ranges from ideas that may be small or seem small, but can have a large cultural impact. Like as an example, this is not revolutionary in the broader world, but we were the first major law firm to have jeans days every day. And that's been something that's common, but in the world of lawyers, that's not something that's acceptable, even today in many, many law firms. And you can walk around firms right here in the Valley, and they're in a suit and tie every day, even in the summer. So I think that's part of bringing the cultural change that we have. And it also goes to bigger ideas. We have, at Fennemore, we have pushed and continue to support a venture accelerator where we support businesses, many of which, if not most of which, are based right here in Arizona, that are bringing lots of creative ideas to the forefront. Most of them are technology-based businesses, and we partner and collaborate, and we'll do their legal work and defer those fees, and we see these businesses grow and develop into more successful entities that are creating jobs for people here in the Valley and in the states where they're located. So I think for us, it is not being wed to tradition, despite being the oldest law firm. Being open to new ideas and being willing to act on them quickly that makes us better lawyers for our clients and makes Fennemore a better place to work for the people we have at it.
With being in the Valley for a number of years, in your opinion, how has the community changed?
Wow. It's changed a lot. So I'm a Phoenix native. I was born and raised here. And there's no doubt that the Valley has changed a lot. I think there was a perception, and probably still is to some extent, among those in the major markets that Phoenix doesn't have a lot going on besides real estate. And look, we do have a great real estate market. We have a lot of development and growth, and our firm has one of the largest real estate groups in the state. But there's a lot more to the Valley, and it's got more complexity to it. When you look at the industries of technology and healthcare, and I mean, right across the street from where we're located, we have a new medical school going up here from Creighton University. There is a dynamic market of growth industries, not only for the state, but for the country. And those businesses and entities and organizations are either headquartered here or have major operations here. So that's new. That's a new advent of the last decade. There was certainly some of that before, but it's exciting to see that continuing to expand, and that I think makes Phoenix a player nationally and interesting, and I'd put it up against any city.
And Fennemore Craig has offices regionally, so how would you compare the Phoenix market to some of your other office locations?
We do. We have 7 offices around the Southwest, and so our major markets we have in Las Vegas, in Reno, in Denver, and Nogales, Arizona. Don't forget that. We have an important office there. We also have an office in Tucson. They're varied based on market. So in our Las Vegas market, clearly gaming is an important industry there, and you see a lot of that. You also have some emerging technology-based businesses that we have there. And we actually have 2 offices in Las Vegas, and one of them is called the Tech Center office because we're located near a startup incubator there. And that's something that kind of fits with the mold of what Fennemore Craig is doing. In our Reno office, actually, that is probably the hot spot right now for creative technology-based companies. And a lot of it comes from Bay Area refugees that are tired of paying the high labor costs, that are tired of housing prices, tired of the commercial real estate being through the roof. And you can go a very, very short distance to Reno, close to Lake Tahoe, and it is just a fantastic area with a lot of energy, and it's dynamic in a way that people who haven't been to Reno recently might not realize. So we've got just a varied array of practices in our offices. Our Denver office, we have a fantastic IP group there and healthcare group. And we're really trying to move into the sectors where we see growth in the future, and all of our offices are playing into that theme.
I'd like to go back to your comment about how technology companies are relocating from San Francisco to Reno. I just think there's a mass exodus of companies leaving the San Francisco Bay Area for a number of reasons, one of them being availability of workforce. So there's a war on talent, and talent there, they're not necessarily loyal to their employers, and so they're jumping ship from one startup to another. So we've actually seen here in the local Arizona market a lot of those companies coming here. So I happened to have been at GPEC's office yesterday talking about kind of some of the key initiatives that they're launching. So they have the hashtag I'm totally blanking on the hashtag, but they're doing this huge initiative where they actually have deployed vehicles in the California market, running around the city talking about why people should get out. So obviously we're sending a strong message from Arizona, but it's been very funny to see the trends that we're seeing here in the local market. So interesting that you did make that point. So trends sounds like, the market overall, here in Arizona seems to be thriving. Mm-hmm. Do you have any input on the economic forecast or kind of what we're looking like here in Arizona?
If I knew that, I probably would be not sitting here, and I'd be broadcasting that everywhere. We don't know. I can only tell you what we're seeing right now. It has been very, very strong for business activity. That is in all sectors. We see a lot of M&A work that's taking place right now. We have a lot of new businesses that are being started. We have a very, very thriving real estate group right now. We're not seeing any downtick in that. With that said, we are continuing forward in the longest period of economic expansion in U.S. history. So you don't need to be a Rhodes Scholar to know that something has to change. This is a cycle, and we will see a downturn. When that happens, I don't know. I hope it's not tomorrow, but it could be. What we're doing, and I think what any prudent business needs to do, is to try and be prepared for that, and to try and make sure we're staffed appropriately. In our world, so we have bankruptcy lawyers that will help businesses that need restructuring. If there is a downturn, we need to make sure that we still have a thriving group there. So if that happens, we're prepared to handle that work. But we're not seeing any signs of slowdown, and we know it's around the corner. So I think right now the key word is preparedness and being ready for what's ahead.
I feel like several other local leaders have said something very similar. It's hard to really predict when that will be. So I want to transition in our conversation talking about corporate social responsibility. So many companies and leaders really value that within their organizations, and a lot of leaders now, that's almost like an expectation that they are participating on some level. Within your organization, just curious, how are you guys getting out in the community and providing, how are you being good stewards in our community?
It's something that's really important at Fennemore Craig. Mm-hmm. So I always like to think of us as construction workers, where we do a lot of building at the firm.
Yeah.
And we build clearly our legal cases, and we've helped build the laws in the state, but it's also just as important that we're building our communities. So we're involved in lots of different ways. First of all, in terms of actually on the ground in the organizations, we have virtually every single one of our legal professionals and lawyers is involved at a board level or in organizations, and they're taking leadership roles there, and that's important to us. The firm also supports those lawyers in those endeavors. We have a charitable giving committee that's comprised of lawyers in all of our offices, and we believe it's important to give to a lot of organizations, and we do that. We also have a Fennemore Craig Foundation where we get in, and it also, of course, there's a giving component to that, but it's also getting members of the firm together where you do the on-the-ground volunteerism, rolling up the sleeves, connecting with the organizations and the people, because I think it can be really easy for businesses to just write a check. And there is a role for writing a check. These community organizations, nonprofits that are doing great work need money to survive. But they also need help, and they also need support. And so we try to give that in the form of labor and money. And that will be varied in terms of what we do. We're very fortunate to have the people who are involved in organizations that will bring those causes into the firm. And people are always getting on board, whether it's through the Fennemore Craig Foundation or just doing it on their own. So I would say that being involved in the community, building the community, is a hallmark of Fennemore Craig, and is something we're really proud of.
And tying that back to our original conversation around generational gaps, I feel like millennials find a lot of value in that, but not necessarily just millennials. Almost every generation cares about being tied to the overall mission and having something that they're associated here with in the community. So every company that I seem to be talking to in town, they have their CSR plans in place, and they definitely are helping those individuals within their organizations to get further involved. So kudos to you guys for actually doing that. As we kind of look to kind of go a little bit deeper diving as far as generations and generational gaps, are there any great publications or resources or tools that you would recommend that people kind of do a little bit more research on?
There are lots of them out there. And I guess I would say, in addition to those that I would recommend, and of course you can read the book, which might be helpful. I think there are a lot that are not helpful. There are so many misconceptions about generations that exist out there. I think you have to be really careful as a business leader in terms of where you go or what you look to or who you look to for advice on this, because it's really easy to try and put these generations into a box. There are 92 million millennials in the United States, and to kind of write off an entire generation is not a good thing. So I think what leaders need to do is to understand the differences. And in the book, we try to use as an analogy shapes. We call them generational shapes. So we say that the baby boomers, which are those born between 1945 and 1965, tend to represent a triangle. The Gen Xers, which are 1965 to 1980, represent a square, and millennials, which generally, at least according to Pew Research, go from 1980 to 2000, are a circle. And the idea is, in broad strokes, that the triangle represents the hierarchy, where you would have mom and dad at the top, kids in the middle, Fido at the bottom. And then on the other end, the circle represents the millennials, where in large part a backlash to that hierarchy and rigid nature of the family structure, at least kind of if you're looking at middle class America, there was kind of that countercultural, resisting formality, Woodstock vibe, and it was come to the kitchen table and everyone give your input. And so we use that as a way to show kind of what the fundamental differences are, but to understand that there's so much more that's the same, and that the key should always be listening to the ideas of the individual. So it's funny, in some ways, even though I was part of this project on generations, I think the best thing we can do is to try and eliminate thinking about generations and focus more on what is this individual bringing to the table, regardless of whether he or she is Gen Z, a millennial, Gen X, a boomer. And I think we'll accomplish a lot more if we do it that way.
I think that's very helpful. So in your everyday practices, I know you're incredibly busy. So what are some winning strategies that you use on a daily basis to set yourself up for success?
Yeah, look, I think everyone has a lot coming at them right now. And I would be lying to you if I told you I had all the answers on that. I probably need to watch more of your podcast to figure it out. Balancing is the life, activities, work, families, the single biggest challenge that I have in my life. It is very, very difficult. What it means for me on a practical level right now is, early morning, you fit in emails when you can. I try to work out early in the morning and I squeeze them in at night. And there's not a magic answer to it. And I wish I had one. I do try to find the times that are sacred. It's time with the kids. I have 2 kids, 5 and 7 years old, taking them to school in the morning, having time with them on the weekend. That's really important. But other than that, it's trying to integrate work and other obligations in a way where you can blend them together. I think there are a lot of people think of this idea of work-life balance, that there's some way that you can kind of check everything that's swirling around in your mind, or all of the emails or all of the work at home when you walk in, and it doesn't work that way. Even if you want it to, there may be some amazing people that are capable of it. I don't think that's a winning long-term strategy. I think the better strategy is to figure out how to not resist it, but integrate it into your life in a more sustainable way. So, daily challenge.
I appreciate you sharing that. I just think it's insightful for other local leaders to know that we're all going through it and there's no one right or wrong way to go about it. So I think it's great to hear that you're always continuing to modify or work on that as well. So when you're not busy working, what do you like to do in your free time, or what activities do you enjoy doing here in our community?
Well, for me, it starts with family and my kids, and they're involved in sports organizations here, and I spend my weekends going to their sports games, whether that's tennis or soccer or swimming, which is great. On a personal level, I love being outdoors. So I love to run, and I ride my bike, and I'll take it down the canals or around town and just get to enjoy the beautiful outdoor life that we have here in Phoenix.
Yeah, we're pretty spoiled. There's so many great things to do and see. Do you have any favorite restaurants here in town?
Oh my gosh. I have lots of favorite restaurants. So my wife and I always reserve Saturday night as our date night. We've done that since our kids were born. Obviously, before then it was a lot easier. So we, every Saturday, will go out and we always try new restaurants. For all the new trendy ones, I like a lot of the staples. You can go to like an El Chorro as an example. This summer, we set a goal that every single weekend we were going to go to one of the resorts here, and we are talking about spoiled. We are spoiled to have so many amazing resorts with amazing restaurants and great dining. And so we just went to a different one every single weekend, and it was fantastic. You feel like you're on vacation, even if it's for just a few minutes.
We have so many great rates during the summer months. So I actually encourage our friends from California or other surrounding states to maybe come and check it out. I mean, if you're sitting poolside, it's really not, it's hot, but it's not unbearable. So
no,
I think that's a great idea. I might steal that one myself.
Steal away.
No, thanks for sharing all that. I know for me, I'm always out and about in the community, setting up coffee meetings or lunch meetings. So it's nice to get a couple new ideas as far as where to meet people here in town. If you were to work with some other individuals, what are some of like your best business practices? Like what kind of differentiates you from your competition here in town?
Would you say at a law firm level or just...
As you as an individual.
I don't, what differentiates me, I think it's trying to find your own style. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to emulate the leadership style or interpersonal style of someone else, you're probably going to fail at that. I'm really lucky at Fennemore, where I have 2 practicing former managing partners that I'm able to go to and get advice from and talk to, and they are great. Their styles were so different, and if I tried to be either of them, there's no way I could do it because it wouldn't be me. And I think it takes time to become comfortable enough and confident enough with the way you do it to kind of abandon what other people have done. So I think early on when I was getting into this role, I thought, well, I'll just try to do what my predecessors did. And it just didn't work. It didn't feel right. So I would say one is finding who you are, your own style, and going with it. And even if there's some resistance to that at first, because if you come into an organization and you're changing things, that's going to feel somewhat uncomfortable at first, but it's sticking with it. I think going back to the theme we talked about earlier, listening, that's really important to try and understand what's motivating people, what inspires them. If they're not giving their all or doing their best, there's probably a reason for that. And I think that's going to be a key. And if you do those 2 things, if you can try to be more true to who you are and find your own style, and you can listen to others and you can adapt, I think you're going to be on the road to success.
I can definitely align with that. I feel like the more conversations that I've had with local leaders, a lot of us have tried to find our own voice and our own style, because if we all look, walk, talk the exact same way, it's kind of boring and repetitive. So people are looking for somebody that kind of stands out in the crowd. So you certainly have built a remarkable brand for yourself, as well as building that on behalf of the organization at Fennemore Craig. So what would you, of all strategies that you've implemented, as far as building your personal brand, what would you encourage other local leaders to focus on, or how to help them do that?
I think it's going to come back to what I said before. I think your personal brand is really just a reflection of who you are, and that can be in simple ways in terms of how you interact one-on-one with someone. That can also be in terms of what you're putting out there on social media or general media. And I think it's finding causes, it's finding subjects that genuinely interest you. So for me, part of that is, in my world, in the legal world, I am a complete geek when it comes to how law firms run, how organizations run, the psychology behind dynamics with lawyers, which I think is very similar to any other industry. I just try to focus on where I practice. And so I write a column in a publication called Above the Law every other week. And for me, I write it in large part because I'm really interested in the subject. I live it every single day. I have these ideas bouncing around in my mind, and putting that down, on paper or in a digital format is really as much for me as it is for anyone else. And the fact that I'm able to kind of put those thoughts down, it helps me crystallize where I think Fennemore Craig should go, or where I think the legal industry should go. And if people get something out of that, then that's a wonderful thing. But if I tried to force myself to go write about some other subject that I thought other people would just find appealing, I probably would fall flat on my face, because I wouldn't have the genuine passion for it. So if you're not finding that, then you're probably not going to succeed. So your personal brand better be a reflection of who you truly are at the core, or that disconnect is going to come through. You're not going to seem authentic. You're going to seem like a phony. So you better find out what really moves the needle for you and pursue that, put that out there, and I think good things will flow from that.
So if people want to know more about your personal brand, are there any social media outlets or websites that people should look at?
So you can start at Fennemore Craig's website. Every lawyer, including myself, has a bio page there, which tells a little bit about them. For me, I may not be as prolific as you on social media, but of course on LinkedIn, I'll share articles that I find interesting. Facebook is kind of my just personal world that I have mostly with my kids. Above the Law is where I write the legal blog, and you can see all of this aggregated at jamesgoodnow.com is where I put it, so it's in one nice, neat place.
Awesome. James, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Lindsay. It's been fun.